Grace to you and peace from the risen Jesus Christ. Welcome to NCCP Anywhere. I'm Dave Stawick, the visiting homilist for NCCP, and I will be with you this weekend up at NCCP. Today I'm joining you from my home on Capitol Hill. We continue our series on dominion. This is our look at God's created world and humans' interactions with and use of the land as we are examining that topic all throughout this month of October. We celebrate people involved in agriculture, such as Donald Cole, who, as John pointed out last week, is on the cover of our Grow Guide and also on our webpage as a lifelong farmer and also organist for us at Grace Church. And I'm excited to participate because it allows me to get back in touch with my background in agriculture, both in working on a farm when I was younger and actually my undergraduate degree, which is in agriculture from the University of Illinois. So I'm relying on my experiences and my education and some updates from friends who were involved still in agriculture back in the Corn Belt. Also, thanks to Carroll County Cooperative Extension, Brian Butler there, for giving me a good update on some local color here for not only Carroll County, but nearby Baltimore County as well. I'm sorry that I don't have a nice rural background literally behind me in the picture, like Pastor John did last week. I get my rural fix when I come up to NCCP territory. That's the whole point of it, right? However, I do have a picture that my wife Susan took when I was preaching earlier this month next to a pretty nice stand of corn at Grace Church. So thanks to Catherine, we'll get a little view of that and a reminder about agriculture right in our backyard at NCCP. Now, today's text from the Gospel of Mark is Jesus' parable concerning a farmer who went out to scatter seed. While Jesus used the device of parables to clarify his teachings to his contemporaries in terms that they could understand, the idea of scattering seed, of throwing it around, is foreign, very foreign to the notion of modern precision farming practices that are now employed. So the title of this sermon is Scattering Seed, a title that's a question. Even though Jesus takes time in his sermon to explain the parable, it nonetheless may fall flat for those of us in the 21st century, those who are familiar about modern techniques of planting corn, and some of the following factors, at least in ballpark terms. Just for instance, a 50-pound bag of hybrid seed corn might well cost about $250. So that is not to be scattered around or to be dropped on the ground when you're filling a planter box, as I got yelled at for doing many moons ago. I still remember it well. By the way, Donald's hat that he's wearing today on the photograph on the website and on the Grow Guide, that is a Pioneer seed corn hat, by the way. Donald, I noticed. That seed is not scattered. It is rather planted very precisely by sophisticated equipment, about an inch and a half, 2 inches or so deep in a furrow, covered back up, and they are placed in rows about 30 inches apart. And that's all to achieve a germination rate of at least 95%, it's hoped. Hopefully even higher than that, 97, 98%. So modern farmers aim for certainly a better germination than what Jesus is looking at in this parable. A modern planter, say 12 rows or some multiple of 6, might cost $80,000. Now that is, again, an estimate that would be from the used equipment market. Not a lot of farm equipment, at least back in the Corn Belt, and same here in Carroll County and Baltimore County nearby as well. There's not all that much new equipment that's actually purchased, but there is new equipment that is leased and then once that lease is up, or once whatever new equipment is sold, that goes into a secondary market. So a ballpark for a used, relatively modern planter would be in the neighborhood of $80,000. The tractor used to pull that planter might be another $80,000, and the combine and the specialized head for corn, different heads for wheat, soybeans, other the front, the business end at the front. That together, a combine with the head might be $100,000. By the way, that equipment may have GPS guided equipment, guidance equipment rather, to do the steering automatically. So it's pretty wild stuff. It should be noted that in Carroll County, by the way, some farmers are using tractors that may be 50 years old, and there may be some combines running that are 30 years old as well. So the cost factors that I'm talking about are different from farm to farm, and also in many cases depending on how large that farm is. And we have all different kinds of sizes of farms in Carroll County and Baltimore County. That land itself, agricultural land, is expensive. It may go for $10,000 productive land, $10,000 an acre to $15,000 an acre. And that's if you can beat the developers who want to buy a parcel for a suburban home. Now, there are also other input costs for fertilizer and pesticides that I won't even get into, because fertilizer gets kind of complicated. Being located in the Chesapeake Bay area, there are legal restrictions on how much fertilizer can be used and at what times, et cetera. But you get the idea. There are other input costs that could be factored in as well. And then at the end of the year, and once the crop has been harvested, then there are transportation costs to get it to its end location, whether it's to a feed mill or a processing plant, or it might even be for an export destination off of the Port of Baltimore. Growing corn is a high input enterprise, and it's also high output. In good years, corn yields in our area can be near 200 bushels an acre, and that's pretty good. This year's yields will be in the neighborhood of about 130 to 180 bushels due to the erratic weather that we had this year. But the point of all this is that for modern farmers, scattering seed, throwing it around, makes little sense. They can't afford to be indiscriminate in their planting and their other farming practices. And it should be noted that their task goes beyond just providing for their own family unit, as we would call it. They are producing food and fiber, collectively farmers are, for 8 billion people all around the world. 8 billion people, acre by acre. That's a big task and a big responsibility. The parable, nonetheless, is instructive for us, despite its arcane nature from our modern point of view, in two important theological senses. The first is that it is emblematic, I think, of the very extravagant nature of the grace of God and God's overflowing love for us. Now, we can talk about the expense of the land and the seed and the equipment to produce a crop, but our salvation was bought at an even greater price, of course, the human life of our Lord Jesus on the cross. God knows that price more intimately than we do. And yet God scatters God's forgiveness and grace and saving power far and wide. Indiscriminate is not in God's lexicon when it comes to grace. We don't need to be sitting in the right place for it, 30 inches rather from another row of it. We needn't be worthy of it. We couldn't even buy it from God if we had the biggest line of credit from a local bank or from the biggest multinational bank that you could find. It's priceless. God's love is not about our creditworthiness. And that's because Jesus is our cosigner. Second, I think this parable should instruct us on how we are to share the fruit of God's grace with others. This is consistent with our lessons from last month that you'll recall, receiving Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and being beyond blessed, going down the mountain to share the fruits of the Spirit. Pastor Jerry preached about them in the last week of September. And as I'm sure you remember, the last time I was with you, I preached about things like exhibiting patience and kindness and listening and understanding and forgiving and loving. Now, some of those seeds may land on fertile ground, some may not. But as disciples, we are called to scatter those seeds, as did the farmer in Jesus' parable, so that God's kingdom will be known on earth, this creation of God, over which we have been given dominion. So if the question for today is scattering seed, even imprecisely and indiscriminately, the answer of discipleship is yes, scatter away. Scatter the seeds of righteousness far and wide, and leave the germination up to God. Now, finally, this passage in the Common English Bible, as you may note when you read it, it's known as the parable of the soils, and it could be preached this way, that is, to concentrate on the soils instead of the seeds. And apropos of that, or at least to consider that, I did my good duty as a good agriculture student, and I consulted a United States Department of Agriculture publication, the Soil Survey of Carroll County, Maryland. Now, I knew that existed because there are surveys for almost every county in the United States. The most recent version for Carroll County was published in 1922, but soils don't change all that much in 98 years, if you at least consider that the Earth was created, according to scientific estimates, something like 4.5 billion years ago. The soil survey describes in detail the very different types of soil, and there are lots of them that can be found just in Carroll County alone, similar types in Baltimore County as well. And it describes their genesis, how they were formed, whether that was through mechanical action, whether it was from siltation, whatever. And it describes the attributes of those soil. Some of them, the silt loam soils that are mentioned, are very similar to those that we have in my home in Illinois. So I feel very much a kinship with this place in Carroll County and Baltimore County as well. I don't want to say that I studied every page of the document, but the summary of it was extremely interesting and useful, and I want to finish with it here and share some of it with you. The summary of the document concluded by saying, the soils of Carroll County are generally strong and productive and respond to intelligent handling. My closing prayer for us is that as we scatter seeds of righteousness and caring and love, that we be strong in our faith, productive in our sharing of God's grace, and responsive to the imperative to be humble servants and stewards of the creation over which God has given us dominion. May it be so. Amen.